Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Great, done. Great. So, hi everyone, welcome to this panel. Give us a couple of more minutes. We are expecting a few more attendees to join us, and then once we are there, we will just kickstart the panel. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat panel. Towards your bottom right-hand corner, you have chat button. Click on that and then start the chat. I do have a couple of questions from the attendees, so I will share them once we are there at an appropriate session. Great.
Sarah, there is a sun on your head.
Oh, is it? Hang on. I'm gonna change the.
You can
I
probably
might just.
move a little
I
bit
wasn't.
on the front.
Yeah, it's because I was gonna do this off my phone, but I knew I would live to regret that decision. I might just put this on my machine.
Okay.
Don't I say I thought it was a good idea, but I knew I would regret that decision. Yeah, you'll just be seeing the light.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Welcome everyone to this panel on the future of DevSecOps. We are pretty excited to have you here with us. And if you have any questions, please do let us know via chat. And a little bit about housekeeping before we move on with the panel is you all are on mute, and you can use the chat feature if you have any questions for the panel, or you just want to share some best practices or whatnot. And then we will try to finish this panel by 6:30 Singapore time, 11:30 GMT, and 9:30 Australian time. And then this session is also being recorded, so we will be sharing this with you once we are done with the session, probably tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Right. So today we have some amazing guests like Jeremy here, Mohan, and Sarah, and Stefan. And these folks combined together, they have about like 50 years of experience, all of them. So we are in a company of some amazing force, and I would encourage you to push them to the boundaries while asking questions. They have seen a lot, and I'm sure they will be able to answer any kind of questions to you, right? With that, I would like Jeremy to introduce himself, and then Mohan, Sarah, and then Stefan. Go ahead.
Thanks, Imran. 50 years, if you notice, actually, out of all of us, only one of our companies existed 50 years ago, and that would be Mohan. Everyone else, our companies didn't exist 50 years ago. And I think it's quite important to think about it, because the world changes, right? And technology is bringing things at a pace and is changing everything. And that's what I believe is about DevOps and DevSecOps. So thanks for introducing me. You've broadcasted everything about me being part of Pivotal. We've been acquired by VMware, so I'm now working for VMware, doing exactly the same thing, which is helping customers, large and middle organization, adapt to Agile, to DevOps, to cloud native architecture. And in my journeys of being not only a security guy, but an infrastructure guy, I've noticed that a lot of security comes from doing IT the right way. And so that's really my role, is to see and to help companies leverage what's the inner technologies of the cloud can help to fix those security issues. And so, yes, you hear me talking about DevOps a lot. DevSecOps, we'll talk about it later.
Okay, great. Mohan, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Imran. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Myself, Mohan, I look into application security for Prudential Insurance across group. We have offices in different parts of Asia, Africa, UK, and US. I was primarily a developer, and then I moved into tester. Eventually, I became a pen tester. And then while pen testing, I realized some of the things, some of the ground realities, that my sphere of influence was limited only to 1 or 2 teams where I was actually doing pen testing. And that was very limited, change. And that's the reason I moved from, pen testing to DevSecOps. So I came from builder, breaker, and, to the defender side of the software development. Yeah.
Great. Sarah, why don't you go next?
Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Good evening or good morning, depending where you are in the world. My name's Sarah Young. I am an Azure security architect for Microsoft. I'm based in Melbourne. So I spend a lot of time in particular with cloud security, and obviously that sort of fits quite nicely in with DevSecOps. I've been knocking around the security space for quite a number of years now in one way, shape, or form. And I pretty much spend most of my day helping customers do DevSecOps type things and how they secure their cloud. So yeah, that's what I do day to day. So yeah, that's pretty much all I talk about.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Stefan, I think you're next.
All right. Yeah, also a warm hello from myself. I'm Stefan, and I've been involved in security pretty much from 2003 onwards in various different positions, starting from being a pen tester and hacker, then going into secure software development, and lately in DevSecOps. And I've been working with, for the most part, as a consultant for very large organizations around the globe, and have seen pretty much every single situation that came up, and in implementing these kind of new paradigms along the way, and as everything evolved. And nowadays, as a result of this, I founded a company called Guardrails, where pretty much the entire focus is on simplifying security and making DevSecOps available very easily to organizations that are not just enterprises, but also smaller companies and even freelancers and startups, so that they can also get the benefits of security and pretty much incorporate the best practices or codify the best practices that I've learned over the years as part of this platform. And yeah, looking forward to the session today.
Great, thank you. As you can see, we have some amazing folks. As I mentioned before, I'm just reminding gently that, hey, throw at them pretty hard questions, because these guys are veterans in the industry and can shield any questions you throw at them. So with that, I think, okay, before that, let me introduce myself. I'm Imran. I run a company called Practical DevSecOps. We are into DevSecOps training and consulting. We help our customers with implementing DevSecOps, no matter what maturity level they are at. I think that should suffice. And then let's move on to the most controversial part of our panel now, which is, what do you think, and what's according to you is DevSecOps? Jeremy, I would start with you.
You mean DevSecOps doesn't exist, right? Well, you know me, right? I've always said DevSecOps is just one angle. When you do DevOps, you do lean and you try to automate everything and to facilitate everything. And when we look at DevSecOps, but in a way between developers and going to production, you don't have only security issues, you have governance, you have risk, you have a number of procurement aspects. So when you really look at the fundamentals of DevOps, which is delivering performance for IT so that developers can focus on customer value, then you need to look at all the aspects of it, and security is one of them. And so I've been fairly frustrated because a lot of the DevSecOps words come from security vendors or application security vendors trying to say, hey, by the way, we're fancy. But the fundamental is not different than we do in DevOps. So what you do overall is enabling companies to, or enabling developers to focus and develop good software for their customers, and having the feedback loops and having all the aspects that allows them to really run them at scale. So yeah, I know it's a lot of people like DevSecOps. Your company is called DevSecOps. It's one part of it, but when we step back and in the discussion we do to watch transformation in companies, very often companies who are asking to implement DevSecOps are kind of missing the picture of DevOps as well. And so that's why I'm ranting about it. But I think it's important. We definitely need to do security better, differently, so that we're not in a way. And we need to think about how security can be enabling developers to go faster instead of trying to minimize how things can go wrong. So yes, I know I'm ranting a lot about it, but on the fundamentals, we all agree.
Great, that's a pretty interesting concept you have, like understanding about DevSecOps. Thanks for sharing with that. And I think, what do you think, Sarah, is the DevSecOps according to you? You're on mute if you're talking.
And I'm on mute. So,
yeah.
By the way, I loved, Imran, how you sort of looked up there, because I assume I'm the box above you as well on the Zoom thing. Maybe I don't know if it changes from person to person, but anyway. DevSecOps. Oh, I did a talk a couple of years ago about DevSecOps, and obviously, like, it is a bit buzzwordy. I think some people will roll their eyes a little bit because it comes into a bit buzzwordy sometimes when we say DevSecOps, and some people say SecDevOps. I've also heard rugged DevOps, and there's some other ones out there as well. And I don't think we have super clear definitions, but to me, and definitely people have, because it's still quite new, we don't have like a really fixed, like, this is what DevSecOps is, these are the steps you need to take. We're getting there, but I still don't think we're quite there. But to me, DevSecOps is quite literally, I keep it simple, that is adding security into your DevOps operations. So, you know, that's it. I don't want to overcomplicate it. Of course, it is a complicated thing because the whole process of moving towards, you know, shifting left and going to a DevOps pipeline is hard in itself. And then to add security in is additional complexity. But that's essentially what we're trying to get to, is to maintain or even improve security posture whilst doing DevOps. Like, I always try to keep it simple, but there you go.
Great, that's a pretty interesting view you have over there, because you see, one of the challenges I see in the industry, security is always you know, at the back. You know, we're sitting because yes. we are known as department of no, and then every innovative stuff which comes up, be it agile or DevOps, we just say probably we should not do it, right? Like when agile came in, people were like, oh, holy shit, what are you doing? You are pushing vulnerabilities every 9 seconds now? Oh, there's huge problem,
yeah,
right?
I mean,
yeah.
To be honest with you, you're right. And I actually think, like, you're right, like security are known as the business prevention department and the no people. And, you know, there's all kinds of like things people say about security. And that has always been the case. And again, I know it varies from organization to organization. Because the fact is, like, security need to change too, and you're right. Although I've massively simplified it in my explanation, one of the things that security have always been bad at is traditionally is that we will say, no, that nice process you have, oh, we can't let you do that because that's not secure. Here are several extra hoops to jump through. And then what people will do is they will try and find a way to go around them, or they'll just get annoyed, and you'll actually slow down business. So DevSecOps, yeah, is the idea is that when you shift to the left, you're trying to make things quicker and more efficient. But in order to put security in that is a massive challenge, because, you know, as you said, security is always left behind, and because it is not the priority from a development or a delivery point of view. And I used to be an engineer who delivered, and I used to find security a pain too before I was in security, because you would just try and do whatever you could to tick the boxes they needed you to, so you could get on with what you were doing. And some security people will say that is the business's fault. They need to do as they're told, essentially. But I don't agree with that, like, because it is security will never win out against business priorities, delivery, availability, etc. Security will never win against those, almost never. And so it's security's responsibility to make security, this is going slightly off specifically DevOps, this is my little security rant, but okay, as security people, we should be making security easy for people to do, so it doesn't have to compete with delivery timeframes, etc. And that is entirely, almost entirely, the security industry's fault that we've tried to make it too difficult, because that's why people try and ignore it, because we make it too hard.
Great, yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And especially, I would like to hear here from both Mohan and Stefan, because these two folks have worked with some pretty conventional organizations like banks and, you know, pretty IoT and pretty, you know, old organization. What do you think, Stefan and Mohan, about this? What's your definition of DevSecOps?
Shall I make the start? One, okay, perfect. Yeah, so I fully agree with what has been said so far. I think, first of all, I think there's two things to differentiate here. First of all, the terminology, which, to be honest, doesn't matter if it's DevSecOps, SecDevOps, rugged, no matter what it is. I think the importance is that it allowed in the early days when DevOps was starting to gain momentum to allow people to have a lens and focus on the security aspects of it. But the naming aside, I think it's more important to talk about the outcomes. What is the importance to achieve with, let's say, DevSecOps? And ultimately, it's really about making sure that engineering teams are not blocked in their ability to ship features very quickly, but it should be as easy as possible for them to ship these, like to make changes in a secure way so that the business risk is not increased. On the contrary, you know, they can really focus on shipping features, making awesome applications, awesome software, so that, you know, people can benefit from that. And security should be pretty much solved so that they don't have to care about it. And ideally, maybe something is done in the background by using cool new approaches, etc. But ideally, only in very few cases, somebody has to say, oh, I have to do something now to make it more secure. But I think this is more like talking about outcomes, which is make sure people can actually, engineering teams can actually ship software very quickly while being sure that, you know, not having to worry about security issues and these things along the way.
Mohan, what do you think?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Jerome. Security is not required, okay? But
okay.
Quote unquote, in the ideal world, okay? So what I mean by ideal world is, see, we use a lot of components in the ecosystem, right? We use OS, we use you know, IDEs, we use different set of tools, we use you know, hosting environment in different stages. If all these environments are secure, are built securely, we don't need to be there. If our developers are taught in their universities and whatever the formal and informal ways, hey, when you develop a calculator, you just don't add 1 + 1, check that, you know, there could be some other value that is possible, you know, and you have to ensure that only the values are accepted. So these, some of the things are, you know, if they are built in the education system, I don't think we would have been here, you know, facing this challenge and making this whole security thing so complex. I agree with Sarah, you know, it should be simple. And Stefan also said the same thing, you know, as much as possible, our aim should be to deliver security in a frictionless manner, So I always say, based on your culture of the organization, you can always start slow, but if you are steady enough, you can always achieve security in whatever the way, you are functioning, basically. So security is required, not because by itself, but because of the ecosystem demands, actually. I hope Jeremy agrees.
You see, Imran, I told you we all agree. Absolutely. I mean, if you look, it's all about making security as transparent as possible so that developers spend more time on actually solving business value. And that's a focus, right? And honestly, if you look, the 90% of a breach have to do with things that are not security, or just things that have been built wrong or mistakes, not very advanced. And if we can solve this stuff already, then that means we can say we can spend more time on what matters. And if you look at the security team of the large organization, and if you look at what they do all day long, I would say 60% of it is not security, it's just chasing bugs, fixing logs that are not coming, or figuring out the context on an alert that comes here. And if we can solve this problem by actually delivering systems that are solid, if we can architect things so that we can finally patch them, right? We know this challenge, and that's where the cloud architecture really helps. Then that means the security experts can spend more time on what they're good at instead of reports, figuring out things that are trivial, right? And that's one of the challenges we need to fix today.
All right. I think we got a pretty interesting question now from audience. Amjad here is asking us about, hey, how do you bridge the trust, the gap which we have in the industry between devs and security? Who would like to take this question?
Happy to make a start if that's okay.
Sure. Yep. Go ahead.
So
Thank you.
One of the most significant experiences I had being in the security industry for that long is when I moved from being a security, let's call it auditor, which is pen tester, review, etc., into being a security engineer and actually going into a team where I was responsible for making this product secure, because suddenly realized that perfect security and having all of these things sorted is no longer an option. You have to take compromises, and it takes a very different mindset to actually achieve that. And I remember very, very distinctively the first day I got onto this project, when I got introduced as the new security person, like people were like, oh, almost disgusted, like, oh no, please, we really have stuff to do. We don't have time for any of this, right? So I think this was just because many times security is, like we mentioned earlier, the department of the business prevention department or whatever it is. Useless things that nobody cares about are being constantly thrown at developers, and we have automated the nagging of these teams, which led to the results, which was like, okay, first you have to pretty much establish, hey, you're not like a traditional security person that is here to make their life hard. You are part of the team that is responsible to making this specific product successful. And there's a different kind of responsibility that overlaps, that is being pioneered or pretty much spearheaded by these people. But it's more like a cultural question of making sure that you have the other team members understand, I'm here in the same thing with you, and I'm actually there to support you. And this is, I think, pretty much a mindset conversation.
Yeah, definitely a cultural issue. The first thing to create the trust is to trust each other and not do something. But it's not unique to security, right? So the start of DevOps was exactly this, was a gap between developers and operations. And if you look at how you create those gaps, you co-create. Right? Actually, look, together we create. We co-create, and we create a culture of we're all in it together. If you step out of IT, if you want an organization that collaborate, you need people who have incentive of working together. And today, our organization is broken. The people who are responsible for security are security. If you look at 80% of the actions that reduce security risk are not done by security. Patching is not done by security. And so you have a an incentive today, and the banking world with the control functions have created this culture where security says, this is wrong, but that has absolutely nothing to, not a skin in the game of building. If you create an incentive of compensating your developers for improving security, compensating your security for improving the velocity of developers, already you have a little bit more teeth in the game of actually getting in the right direction. And building a platform, you can look at a number of the famous cloud companies who are very effective. They build tools that are inherently used by developers to make them go faster, and where security is built in. In many organizations, developers spend their time with 40 pages of a form saying, hey, by the way, and all those things. And you go through this assessment form, and 20% of it has to do with the application itself. 40% has to do with the infrastructure and other components. And so the developers say, I don't know, right? And then you go to see infrastructure, and it's like, well, I don't know about the application. So you have so many gaps and holes. So if you really want to create a trust, already make things that are meaningful for your developers, meaningful for your users. And if you see that it's every day that you need to feel it, automate it, right? So that's really one of the aspects. You need to get people aligned on the goal, and there is a few architecture goals that really can improve security, and where everyone, if you get them motivated in the same direction, you have massive improvement. But also trying to, get security to build. Yeah, you understand the build mindset and the pain that developers are going through when you are starting to build yourself.
Great, thanks for your inputs on that. Another question we have here is like, we all agree that DevSecOps is important, irrespective of what we like to call it, DevOps or DevSecOps. So the question we have here is that what kind of trends do you see in the industry from a DevSecOps perspective? And can you also shed some light like where the industry is going in terms of DevSecOps? That's another one. Yeah. Mohan, why don't you go first on this one? You're on mute, Mohan, if you are talking.
Sorry, yeah. So, so there are different ways to look at, how and where the DevSecOps is going. If you just, let me take a minute to get a quick overview of, how and where we stand now. So we started from waterfall model, then we came to Agile, and then the DevOps. And the overall the security also has evolved, right? We started from network security, perimeter security, firewalls. Now we have different facets of security like application, cloud, infrastructure, and so on. So the security also has evolved, and that's where we have seen that the application security, also has got to evolve based on the need of, the overall ecosystem. And so the previous question was really good, because when we talk about application security, what are we talking about? We're talking about the application, we're talking about the data, we're talking about the stack in which the application is actually being running. It could be Kubernetes, or it could be a VM, or it could be any other tired architecture. So all that basically is part of your concern, or threat vector, I would say. So anything that we can improvise in terms of improving the security of that whole stack is basically a part of AppSec, and thus the DevSecOps. So as we have been saying, right, you need not call DevSecOps by that name. It can be anything as long as you're able to deliver security, or secure systems in the production. So so basically, the way I see eventually where we would end up, at least not end up, but at least are moving towards is I'm seeing a lot of change already being, happening from monolith legacy applications to, API-based or microservices-based development. And so, we need to step up also. So, we should be looking at, hey, how can I help developers to ensure that when they're developing APIs or microservices, can I identify a right set of API gateway for them? Can I identify right API portal for them? Can I help them with the better specialist API security tool for them? So if you make the whole environment conducive, developers would actually start liking you, and the lesser the friction that you create in delivering the security service, better is the adoption of the overall security system, in your organization. So again, so that was from the API perspective. And since we are already moving from on-prem to cloud, with all the various cloud service providers, now I see a very good trend in terms of moving, from our traditional pipeline-based CI mechanisms to, cloud service provider-based CI mechanisms. It could be Azure's DevOps, or similarly, Google has its own, AWS also has their own native CI mechanism. So that's something is being picked up by the development teams. The reason for that is there are a lot of constraints to deliver when it comes to the traditional CI mechanisms or CD mechanisms, for that matter. And CSPs are intelligent enough to pick up these small items and give them the freedom in the cloud-based native CI solutions. And that's really that's what I see. Basically, people are moving towards, at least in the different cloud service providers. With regard to security tools, I think there's going to be a lot of disruptions. Stefan is here, from Guardrails, and I like that tool, by the way. And so there's going to be a lot of consolidation in terms of tools, and there's going to be a lot of disruption as well at the same time. Going forward, I'm seeing that already. In next 2 to 5 years, we should be able to see a lot of framework-based, very niche tools which cater to more than a particular track, right? So when we say DevSecOps, we see the traditional tracks like, hey, static analysis, hey, dynamic analysis, hey, container security or software composition analysis. But eventually, I think there will be 1 or 2 tools which are very niche. Say, for example, catering to only React-based framework, catering to, say, Node-based framework, or catering to some other framework. But they would actually deliver the whole package, and you don't have to worry about doing multiple different analysis. And developers are going to really like it. And these small startups that are there, they are actually going to disrupt this security tools market very soon and very quickly. Yeah.
So if I could summarize, you are mentioning that the cloud providers are becoming secure by default. That's the one. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you are saying that the more organizations are moving towards cloud, so thereby being secure by default, because security mechanisms are embedded by default in cloud providers, right? I also saw in your last presentation, Mohan, you mentioned that using cloud by default gives you lots and lots of security gains by default. Whereas if you're on-prem or maintaining your own data center, then you might have to think about all of these things, right? And then you're also saying that there's a niche tooling which is being produced in a startup world. So that's is on the rise. So what do you think, Sarah? Do you have any other input points?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So particularly around the cloud side of things, I really want to caution using the phrase secure by default when we talk about cloud. Only because I think we are moving away from this mindset in general. But if we say secure by default, that whilst cloud platforms do provide a lot of really great security at the cloud platform layer, it doesn't mean that you don't need to do some security work if you put your things in the cloud. So I just want to, and I think most people nowadays, I think sort of 4 or 5 years ago, there was still a general misconception that it used to vary wildly between 2 things. It would either be everything in my cloud, I put everything in the cloud and therefore it's secure because it's my cloud provider's issue. Or it would be, I still don't trust my cloud provider at all. I want to audit and check absolutely everything they do. And when really we need to be somewhere in the middle. Now, I think that understanding and level of maturity across just generally the industry has grown a lot. But you still will find pockets of places that still go to one of those two extremes. So it will be, I've put my stuff in the cloud, therefore it's fine. It's my cloud provider's problem. And the people who still want to check everything. So that's why I don't love secure by default when we talk about cloud. I know what you mean, Mohan, but I'm going to say shared responsibility model, because, but with the shared responsibility model, it doesn't matter what cloud you're using. It is the same thing is important, that if you're putting your things in the cloud, you understand really clearly what your cloud provider is going to do and what you are going to do. Now, granted, most cloud providers are probably going to build a better data center than you can, and they will have much more controls and processes, etc. They have the luxury of scale and etc. So yeah, probably by putting your things in the cloud, you are undoubtedly uplifting your security posture. But if you take a badly made application that's full of that could be got by OWASP top 10, SQL injection, whatever, and you lift and shift that into the cloud, it is still a vulnerable application in the cloud. I think securing things is much easier in the cloud. Using the built-in controls and third-party tools as well, because you usually need a mixture for your entire ecosystem. But yeah, secure by default. Don't love that phrase. Just massive asterisk next to it. Massive asterisk saying secure by default, but.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, well, it was Imran's idea of just taking part of my thing and then only that. Okay, I definitely agree. By the way, we are in Azure, so yes.
Okay, that's good. So both.
What I tried saying was yes. What you said was exactly right. So a lot of things are already available. That does not mean you have configured for your application, right? So and again, it's a shared responsibility. Definitely, I agree. So it's all matter of how do you tune your application. How do you tune your ecosystem in the cloud, and the features that are given by the cloud security providers? Yeah.
Great. I would ask both Stefan and Jeremy, both of them are, at least Stefan is running a SaaS company, a security company at that. And then Jeremy was with Pivotal till a couple of months ago. So both of them are at the front of doing DevSecOps. So why don't you both share what trends are you seeing currently in the industry?
Yeah, let me go take a shot at it. As you mentioned, I was at Pivotal, so I have a biased view around it. And for those who don't know what Pivotal is, we live cloud native. We transform modern application toward modern cloud native application, and we believe in the value of doing this. And we believe in it because we see the benefits. We see that the biggest hurdle to implementing DevOps and DevSecOps is the architecture of your application. And you move it on the cloud, it's one thing, it doesn't really change anything about the security of your application. Once you understand that DevOps is about loosely coupled services that can be changed at pace without impacting any others, and you understand that once you already design your application to a modern design, then you unlock the velocity. And that's one of the trends we see is a lot of adoption towards microservices to be able to patch within, okay, theoretically minutes, but within days. We see companies who have fully automated patching because they know that they are using test-driven development. They have practices that make sure that when they change something, they're not breaking anything. So they have those 5 nines in terms of change without breaking anything, and that unlock a lot of the benefits you have behind. If you run towards so what the security industry calls zero trust, but just authenticated workloads, and rotate those certificates and rotate your secrets very often, you reduce the attack surface and the probability of having lateral movement massively. So if you look at those patterns, we see that a lot of the sources and the attack vectors of most breaches are massively reduced, and you haven't spent a dime on security tools, right? That enables security team to focus on what matters, which is application security. Today, there is nothing, and I would say that's an industry challenge. There is nothing that has been done because the tools that are used by developers are not building security. That's why we still know those security companies who need to bolt on. But what you see as a trend is the companies who are building those services, so language, cloud, are actually building security in. So that's really a transformation we'll see over the years, a lot of acquisition, a lot of companies who say we want to enable and we want to simplify the job of the developers. Microsoft is very openly saying doing it, just trying to build as much as possible. We do as well. I'm extremely biased on this one. I work cloud native every day, so and in VMware, I'm working on the Tanzu business, so it's exactly the same. We modernize. Another trend you see, because a lot of the challenge in DevOps and DevSecOps is organizational, and we've had a lot of companies who try to do DevOps or DevSecOps by just building the things themselves. Is really what you want is teams that are autonomous. So that means you need to build and provide platforms that they can use, and that's really another trend we see is more use of cloud native platform or any platform. You can build it yourself if you want, but to unlock and to make sure that the teams you do DevOps don't reinvent the wheel, all of them. If you have 400 teams, you don't want them to reinvent, because otherwise that means security needs to chase 400 different patterns. So simplifying and trying to homogenize the way you approach to it, having more strategic approach is something we see going on. And the last point, which brings back to one of the questions that was here, is when we talk about DevSecOps, we talk a lot about the pipeline, which is the development, and very little about ops, right? And so that's really where the old practices of doing a pen test before going to production obviously can't go when you're pushing to production several times a day. So we see more practices toward, of course, bug bounties and red teaming to have a continuous attack to your systems and learn quickly. That requires, again, the culture of the red team report is not, I blame the developers for having made a mistake, but okay, something went wrong. How do we improve the tools so that developers don't make a mistake again? How do we improve our detection to make sure we detect it next time? And so people who know me knows that I'm an advocate of security chaos engineering as well, for the same purposes. Is if you want to make sure that your team is sharp, is able to react when security incident happens, or make sure that your systems actually work. So there is no other solution than to inject failures, to really test it, and not waiting passively looking at the dashboard saying everything is fine. And so these are the modern practice we see coming up and pick up overall. So that's why I'm a bit frustrated in the use of DevSecOps as just a pipeline. If you want to go from dev to ops, you have to cover ops, you have to cover dev, the funding and the innovation. What happens when someone has an idea, wants to start something, is very often a big challenge in organization. And that's where there's opportunities there.
Jeremy, like there's this interesting question for all of you, which is that what are your thoughts on why current security products could, how the current security products could be disrupted? I would ask Stefan to chime in, because he is the CEO of Guardrails. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, maybe one more thing to add from Jerome's last point is also, I think a lot of it, especially when it comes to chaos engineering, it's a maturity question, because it's crawl, walk, run. If you are still like fighting fires that have nothing to do with getting more problems, then yeah, you still have another step to clear. But ultimately, of course, getting to a level of maturity where you can do chaos engineering, fantastic. And that's going to be very good, because teams that actually get to that stage, they will be battle hardened. They will be able to do pretty much anything. Like you can throw anything at them and they will be able to succeed. There's the funny story about Netflix not realizing that AWS went out a few years back because the servers were so resilient that things kept going for quite a while longer. Anyway, so there was just one thing to mention. When it comes to now to trends that I see, which also goes a bit in the direction of how upcoming startups and new approaches to security are actually gonna disrupt the existing industry, I think one key aspect is actually developer security, which means that traditionally security tools, like if you look at a Gartner Magic Quadrants, probably 90% of them are actually, designed coming from a waterfall era, where you have a box somewhere, you're gonna tick a compliance checkbox, you want to have a result, somebody gives you a zip file that you get in there, okay, you run it, you get a PDF report with 100 pages, you give it back to the team, your job as compliance officer is done, pat on the back, and it's all good. Clearly, in the modern times, this does not work so well. I hope my connection is stable enough.
Yeah. You broke a bit between, but then you're fine now.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I think that's the key point, that traditionally security tools are more tailored to the waterfall era. Nowadays, though, you have these continuous releases, and you actually want to make sure developers get the tools they need at the right time. So just-in-time feedback and relevant feedback. So making sure that developers are actually, and I hope my connection is still holding up, that developers are actually getting the right tools at the right time, the right feedback at the right time is very important. On top of that, yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, on top of that, I think an important distinction is that it's not so much about the tools that we have and the rules that identify issues, but it's about also integration to the workflow, which means it should be tightly integrated with version control systems so that you don't have to actually create pipelines or anything like that. It should be tightly integrated with cloud providers so that you actually can do the scans on an ongoing basis. You actually understand what's happening and can take action and can give feedback as things happen. Not when somebody decides to give you a nod saying, hey, can you scan this system, or can you look at this repository? And I think the other part is also making sure that the tools are orchestrated, which goes into this point as well, because nobody cares about one tool that does one thing for one language. Developers don't want to know about SaaS test or container security or whatever other acronym you're going to throw at them. They want to know if they have to do something or not, to make sure the application is secure. And this abstraction level is what I see as coming up and going to disrupt the existing way of doing things, because you want to be abstracting the way security is done. You want to be there in real time, continuously giving relevant feedback, ideally even completely taking care of some of these fixes for developers, and solve all of these things on that level first.
Interesting. We have a pretty similar question on this line, is that Shahidul here says that, hey, the tools are definitely helping the ecosystem, but the question is, do we have anything related to process-driven framework which would help us implement DevSecOps in probably in financial institutions and whatnot? You want to take this question, Stefan?
Sorry, can you repeat? It was just apologizing for my unstable connection.
Okay, so the question was, the tools are definitely helping the ecosystem. What can we do from a process perspective to improve overall DevSecOps implementation in organization?
Yeah, so I think on the tool level, if you want to have a good solution, it needs thousands of rules that identify vulnerabilities. So if you have thousands of rules that identify vulnerabilities, then you have a great solution. I think that's the exactly wrong approach, because the tools actually should be curated. So every single rule that actually alerts should be considered a real issue. So you actually take the pain away on that level with the curation of rules and the elimination of false positives by applying things like machine learning, deep learning, etc., to make sure that whatever is being provided to the developers is an actionable result. And also legacy depths, you don't want to see for every scan that you have 100 vulnerabilities. You only want to see the vulnerabilities that actually are being introduced, at least on the level of a developer, because nobody cares if somebody else introduced something, and nobody's going to take any action on these issues. But if you just introduce the SQL injection and you get the feedback, hey, this line of code that you've just introduced is actually a problem, and this is how you fix it, that's a very different conversation. Because then you actually empower these the engineers at just in time for issues that they're actually currently working on to fix them before they actually merge the pull request, for example. And I think that's also one way to leverage tools and add this layer of abstraction, for lack of a better word, that makes these results more useful and taking away from the traditional complexity of all the issues that you have to care about and how you manage them, but give them exactly what's required at the right time.
Great. So on a similar lines, we have another question, which is about one of our attendee works for a financial institution, and they're really, really proud of their DevOps engineering culture. Now, they would like to go implement security as part of DevSecOps. Now, who should be responsible for that? Is it CEO, CIO, or who's that? Like even the board, who's responsible for bringing that DevSecOps, moving towards DevSecOps from DevOps culture? You want to go, Jeremy? Want to take this?
Yeah. As I mentioned, it's a cross-organizational discussion. So if you need to motivate people to go in the same direction, you definitely need to have someone beyond the CISO to drive it. That said, if you want to implement security, that won't be the CIO or the CEO coming up and say, hey, we should be doing this, right? So it has to come from the CISO or an enlightened CIO who really cares about security. And there is a lot of things you can do as quick wins, strategic decisions. If you look, we've seen quite a number of financial organizations who've decided to go, okay, let's go and use those architecture. Let's get rid of this legacy system or remove the technical debt. So it's really a strategic decision that you can't do outside of security. It has to be on building the foundation for the future. If it's a company that already does DevOps, I would say they probably have a lot of things they can do already. They just need to measure a certain number of outcomes. And I know I have my set of 12 security outcomes that the company should be looking at that are transversal. But already you look at your ability to patch, you look at your ability to remove and rotate your secrets, you destroy and rebuild, and you see how long your workloads are living, and so that you make sure that everything comes from code and hasn't been compromised. You've massively improved your security, right? And after, you can have some technical discussion about what tools, what product, and you can improve your pipelines. But there is some discussion that needs to be at a higher level of what is our IT strategy today. And so it has to be CISO and CIO agreeing and not going against each other on where do we go with that. The CEO will probably be a sponsor saying, we care about security, and a very good sponsor of making people feel that not just lipstick on the pig, but the people who are going to solve the solution are the CISO and the CIO together.
So I see a lot of questions on the cultural aspect of DevSecOps. So this is definitely a challenge which a lot of you are facing in the audience. But then what do you think about this, Mohan? Like, this is definitely a challenge, but how we can encourage this, reduce this risk and bring about collaboration amongst us in the organization? How do we fix it?
Yeah, sure. Let me answer this question while touching three questions which were asked in the panel so far. First thing, the question was related from Sanoop, was related to they are already matured, they are proud of DevOps or DevSecOps in their organization, and they are facing some challenges, right? So, and then you touched upon a very important point about including that, including security as part of agenda while choosing your board of directors or, senior management. And then there was a question about, open, software composition analysis or dependency analyzer. I think answer to all those questions lies with what happened in 2017 with Equifax. Now, if you see, Equifax taught multiple lessons to us. First thing, there was a person in charge who had nothing to do with security, but looking into security, right? So that head was replaced with someone more mature in security, right? So we understand, in the hierarchy, we need to have people, right people, so that they understand the gravity of the situation, and then they prioritize accordingly, So the issue in Equifax happened because, we know Struts2, it was an open source library, and that had issue. They had issued the patch, but the team actually did not prioritize to patch it up, right? So open source is a big challenge and will continue to be a big challenge for some more time at least. So that's a second lesson, and now there are tools which are really very specialized, doing a very good job and delivering some value. And then I think I missed the name there. Yeah, Shahidul, he mentioned about process, which is a really very important point actually. See, we can always buy tools, right? Just like that. You have money, you buy it, that's it. But how do you actually make it adoptable or make developers adopt it in their day-to-day work? It's part of the culture, it's part of the process. So these two things are very crucial, especially in organizations like banking and finance and insurance, where there are a lot of legacy code, legacy applications, monolith, and at the same time, they also have some divisions which are fintech, right? So a big bank has a fintech division, and they are using, the extremes other side of the, technology landscape, like completely IoT based, NFC based stuff. And while you have code in COBOL, I'm not saying COBOL is bad. I'm just saying, you have a variety of, technology landscape to cater to. So unless, and obviously one tool cannot fit this whole, spectrum, right? Or set of tools cannot fit in. So you have to mix and match and identify right set of tools based on your requirement. So in spite of you have enough tools, appropriate tools, and this point of process driven is very, very crucial. And culture is very important, when we deliver the security through DevSecOps or any whatever name that you call. So unless it is part of that organizational culture, it is very difficult to ensure that security gets percolated and delivered in the production. So it could be, you can do very simple things in terms of improvising process. First, ensure that developers are given these whatever tools when they want it. Say for example, we keep talking about shift left, right, in the whole software life cycle. So when you say shift left, you should identify right stuff in the IDE level. So you have I may be using Eclipse, IntelliJ, or whatever, Visual Code, anything, so if you're able to actually detect some issues while I commit the code in my whatever GitHub, Bitbucket, or whatever. So if I'm able to do that, I think that's the biggest thing. Immediately I'm actually able to fix it, and then only I can check in. So if you are able to put that as part of your mandatory process, before you check in, you have a webhook which basically looks at the code. It could be a simple file, it could be a few lines, or it could be the whole module. Just quickly scans it and gives me a feedback. If I get a such tool, I would love to have as a developer in my ecosystem. Then have your tool embedded in your build processes. So maybe there are 10 developers, they have contributed their code, now it's in the build process. So if I am able to give feedback in the build process in a completely frictionless manner, I should not have, as a developer, I should not have any dependency in with the folks from infrastructure, folks from SRE team, folks from security, because I'm paid to develop, and I should be able to do this without any dependencies. So if you facilitate that, I think a lot of work gets done quickly. You don't have to worry about how do I embed the security. So you have ID feedback, you have CI level pipeline feedback, and then moving to the right, you may once you move from your build environment or dev environment to UAT or other staging, you can run some tools like I mean, I won't name the tools, but these tools basically have capability to do the dynamic analysis, look at your container or a Docker image in your repository, and then run the scan there. and then give them the feedback. And if you have a policy, hey, if you have these criticals, you are not going to production. And it looks little, department of saying no, yes, I agree. But if you look at the overall impact it creates, over a period of time. So initially, definitely there will be resistance in the beginning. But once the developers get used to this whole process of, hey, I need to take care of this because this is my code, right? So once they embed that sense of ownership, into the code that they develop, they get more responsible, and in 2, 3, 4 iterations, we have seen in the organization, even the large organization, you see the graph going downwards, the number of vulnerabilities that are reported in their respective modules. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to do a dirty job, they want to do a good job. Only thing is these tools, the processes should be able to facilitate in a manner where, their development actually gets flourished, and it shouldn't be get restricted because of the processes and tools and rules and regulations. Yeah, so that's what I feel.
Agree on that. Everyone wants to do the right thing for the right reasons. Just that they don't have good tools. As Stephen always mentions in his presentation, that we need to give right information to the right people at the right time. So I think that definitely brings rings a bell with a lot of people here. Of course, Jeremy and Sarah might agree with me here. But so the next question we have from our audience is, I think Sarah or Stefan, you both, Sarah, I would want you to take this question, which is that we see that industry is moving towards DevSecOps, but if you implement DevSecOps, what's the future of AppSec professionals, pen testers, and other security professionals? Would they be obsolete? Would they have jobs? What would be the fate of those professionals?
I think jobs are going to change, but I certainly, there's still going to be a need for AppSec people and pen testers, but I think that the jobs will just change. And I don't think it's something to be scared of, because we all work in tech, right? Our jobs change all the time. If I look at what I was doing 10 years ago, no one would most of that technology, no one would work with anymore. Like, my job has changed and stuff becomes obsolete naturally in tech. I mean, I think they say that nowadays, within a year or 2 years, whatever technology you've learned will already be starting to be out of date, if not entirely out of date. So, I mean, that's the worry about skills becoming obsolete is a challenge that I think everyone in the tech industry has to some extent. We have to keep up to date and follow the trends and make sure that our skills are relevant. I think it's one of the things that is great about the IT industry, that there's always room to learn, but at the same time, if it's not the kind of career where you can stagnate in your skill set. Specifically for AppSec and pen testers, though, I think what's going to happen is we're definitely going to shift away from, do the big pen test before something goes live and create a report. But there will still need to be security assessments in some way, shape, or form, even if we're looking at tools, or we're using tools to look at these incremental changes, pushing to production several times a day. The format of the job will change, but still the nature of having to report these any vulnerabilities, explain what's wrong with them, explain the risk, the actual risk and the potential impact, like that isn't going to go away, in my opinion. I'd love to hear what the other panelists think. So I think all of us can expect our jobs to change, but they won't go away as such. They're just going to change and grow as all IT roles do.
I couldn't have said it much better than what you did just there, Sarah. Amazing answer. That's a typical myth we find these days. Hey, if we implement DevSecOps, we no longer need to hire pen testers, auditors. It's automatically is gonna do pen test and outside. But sad reality is that tools are not perfect. They probably could do about 60 to 80% of the job, but then rest of that definitely needs human intervention. Talk about business logic testing. If you have a multi-layer testing, then definitely we need human intervention. Then someone who can think about, hey, is this process going according to the expectations? So what do you think, So this question is for Stefan, which is that, so there seems to be a lot of confusion, including this, that, hey, if you do DevSecOps, we don't need to do pen testing. If you don't need to do compliance or whatnot. But then how do we diffuse these kind of misunderstandings in the organization while implementing DevSecOps?
I think it's a good question. I think the short answer is understanding what tools can do well and what people can do well. And if anything, tools should help make the work of AppSec professionals and pen testers more meaningful. Because if somebody goes hunting for this minor thing that's so easy to identify that is fixed in 1 second, you know, this should not be what people should focus them looking for, right? These things that can be easily automated should be automated by the tools. And I think there's going to be a big increase of you know, deep learning applied to this kind of tools and platforms to catch even more issues at a much higher level of accuracy. However, that means people, I think, to keep updated, you should become more like a security engineer that works with product teams. And actually, development engineering skills are very important. Actually understanding what a developer's going through and how security applies to that. Maybe helping come up with the architecture, reference implementations that are actually solid, that allow us to, you know, easily solve a problem, because many problems are also in engineering. Build a dashboard and an API, and that's it, right? So there's definitely ways you can help to solve some of these things very securely, and help replicate these efforts to make sure that also developers can make fewer mistakes, right? But I think that's one of the things. Security will never go away. There's still going to be the need to check and everything. But I think the skill set required to actually contribute will have to increase, because tools will be able to identify more and more of these issues and much faster, which I think is great. But yeah, it's probably going to be more the focus in the direction of becoming a security engineer. That's going to be something that is very much sought after, I think, in the next couple of years as well. A cloud architect, security architect, really being able to understand systems end to end and help make these things better.
Yeah, I think the question regarding future of pen testers, or let's call them offensive security, is not going anywhere. It's actually rising, and it's going to be more important. Let's not forget that the goal of security is not to make sure that people don't get caught by a tool. It's to make sure you don't get hacked, right? And that's why there is such a bright future to those red teams, to bug bounty, because the best feedback is someone telling you they found a problem. And the problem with the tools is they very often point the fingers towards developers, saying, hey, you did your job wrong. But our SOC today very often are not able to detect breaches as well. And so when you do those offensive tests, if you do a red team, if you do a bug bounty, you have an additional feedback loop, which is your SOC didn't detect anything. And so that's why it's such an increasing part of the strategy of security, is constantly testing and hammering your system to make sure that you can find, and your teams are sharp on finding the attacker or the breach as quickly as possible. And the tool, SaaS to DAST, won't help you have a SOC that can detect teams an attack very quickly. We'll also see more of the DevOps team actually being enabled to detect anomalies by themselves. That's where those AI or those deep learning will help a lot. But the role of offensive security is only going to rise, because at the end of the day, the other best benchmark whether your systems are secure or not is whether you get breached or not.
Great. So we have different views on how we can improve this whole collaboration among entities in the organization. Especially now, the pen testers are worried, hey, if we implement DevSecOps, then we will be out of our jobs. Now, how do we bring this energy in the entire organization? Like, pen testers are working with the help of maybe DevSecOps, because if there is any such job description, there is none actually, to be very honest. Everyone is doing everything these days. And I believe down the line, like maybe 10 years down the line, we won't have an AppSec engineer or a network engineer or a compliance engineer. Everyone would be just doing everything. We have this phrase which says software is eating the world, right? Probably we would see that. That's where we are going. Hopefully, I would like to see this sooner than later. Then that's not reality. But then other challenge I see these days, Mohan, I think you would be in a much better shape to answer this question, is that there's a huge lack of synergy among the organization. How do we address that?
Yeah, good question there. In my first answer, I talked about ecosystem, right? So in organization, see, why security is required is the basic question. Security is required because there have been ways in which the security vulnerabilities get injected in the overall process, okay, in the overall softwares that get delivered in the production, right? So obviously people, the processes in different parts of that ecosystem, they have their own experiences, biases, and whatever formal and informal education or anything that they pick up on the go. That basically forms their opinion, right? And if you look at the difference between a finance company or the largest bank or on one side and the fintech or startups on the other hand, so you can very clearly see that if a fintech is actually very agile and they can actually go ahead and decide something and act quickly and then start delivering it, right? But that change in a bank or a financial institution which is like 50, 100 years old, things are slightly different there. So if you look at the overall way in which we are evolving, right, we can see some of the changes that are already happening, which are moving or forcing us rather to synergize. If you look at 6-7 years back, we were seeing a lot of project management jobs, test management jobs. These people were just managing people to do whatever they were doing. But now, if you see, fast forward 5 years, you would see no managers at all in the overall hierarchy. At least that's what I've seen so far. So the management concept is actually being moved, and now we have these sprints and agile and DevOps. So these concepts have actually increased the accountability of individuals and reduced any relaxed attitude that has been there since ages actually. So that part is evolving, and now people are more they're getting more visibility, they're getting more responsibility, and people like responsibility provided there is accountability, right? And once these different people, right, people who are having good testing experience, one who have development experience, one who have probably architecture kind of experience, so when they come together in a small sprint, what is our job basically? It could be infrastructure security, cloud security, app security, or SRE. Our job is to just facilitate them, and obviously, our formal and informal education does not give us that input about security. That's where, we have to fill it in, right? And they have come along after a lot of years of experience, or maybe freshers, So we have to fill that gap in some ways. And those some ways is basically how we actually bring synergy based on the culture, based on the process that is there in the organization. So since this management layer is going now, and more accountability is being driven inside the organization, more control is being given to the development teams, and the other supporting teams are basically helping the development teams to push them to do only what they are good at, which is development. Now, as I said, whatever cloud security, infrastructure security, SRE, app security, these folks, if they are able to understand, hey, development team is struggling with this new framework, and if these guys actually come together and just understand the problem and help them quickly, it shouldn't take like, hey, set up a meeting and it happens after 2 weeks, and then there's another meeting set up later to take some action maybe after 3 weeks. That is not going to help, right? So if you want to bring synergy, you have to help them quickly. And one of the ways is what I have seen work that in my previous organization and the current one is the automation. So if you're able to bring this feedback from various facets of security in an automated way, a lot of things get simplified. So you show them, hey, how do I integrate different security tools, how I can use it. Okay, that's one way of doing automation. Second way, hey, if I'm able to have the system defaults through SRE teams, which are already secure, so that there is very less scope for me to, as a developer, to commit a mistake, which is insecure. Third thing, give them the feedback through dashboard, saying that, hey, these are different facets of your application, and these are different vulnerabilities that we are seeing. It could be at container level, it could be at source code level, it could be at your open source level, it could be in your OS, and it could be in your message queue. So if you're able to show them, hey, these are the issues, now since you are DevOps, you own it, and if you're able to prioritize them and say that, hey, these are some of the things you need to fix it, and then only you can go. Initially, as I said, they may feel a little awkward to go and learn those aspects, but eventually in iterations, it actually simplifies a lot. And then once you see that being driven by the process of that organization, a lot of things actually go very securely in the production. At least that's what I've seen in the last 4 to 5 years in different organizations that I've worked with. So process is the key.
Great.
Automation is the key, to synergize.
Great. I think you brought up a lot of points on how do we fix these things, but do you see any roadblocks, especially, Sarah, you work with a lot of customers. So do you see any roadblocks which stops organizations from implementing DevSecOps or being cloud native or just doing good security in general?
I don't think fundamentally, I think it's really hard to generalize. I've worked in my career with, I've worked for big organizations. Internally, I've worked with big organizations as a consultant, and there are so many things. Obviously, we focus a lot when we talk about not being able to do tech or limitations or blockers. A lot of the time we focus on the technical side of things. And we're not wrong to do that because, technical blockers are a thing. But I think as well, when we look at big organizations, and not even just big organizations, that's unfair. It can happen in medium and small ones too. Blockers can be so much more than just technology. It can be political, it can be financial, it can be cultural. There can be so many reasons. And I think sometimes we oversimplify things by just saying, oh, well, their technology is really old. For example, they're using out-of-date things. This application is so old, we can never move it into the cloud, or we can't, put it as infrastructure as code and modernize it. It's too old. But I'm still a believer personally in where there's a will, there's a way. I think sometimes we have to look beyond technical blockers. Sometimes I know, I find that a lot of security, and there's a lot of psychology in everything we do, and I am no psychologist. I am not trained in any way, shape, or form in psychology. But sometimes people use technical blockers as an easy excuse for actually covering up other reasons that things can't be done. So I'm talking more generally here, but the reasons for that can vary so much between organizations. I think that's why we're still not there, as in. We've got lots of good practices. There are lots of well-established best practices in the DevSecOps space because it's so new, not so much yet. But if we had a magic formula that said, here, to do security well in every organization, you do A, B, C, D. Done, then number one, a lot of us wouldn't have jobs, and number two, somebody who invented that would be very rich. And I think the challenge, but probably also the thing that makes the security industry most exciting, is that I think we can apply some general rules and principles at a high level, but when you get down into the nitty-gritty for each organization about why they can't modernize their security, why they can't move to cloud, all of these different things, it starts to get very, very specific, I think. And that's what makes it so hard, but also interesting. So yeah, it's a tricky one. And probably the reason most of us have jobs in security, because if there were a magic formula, we wouldn't need so many people.
I'm pretty happy to know that. At least I don't have to worry about my job. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, yeah, it's just, there's so many factors. And even if you get in like people like external consultants, then they need to learn, you know, they need to understand the context. I think the word I use a lot is just, we need to understand context to make the right decisions. And context requires people and human brains to interpret that in a way that I don't think anytime soon we would be able to get AI or tools to replicate. And that's why we still need people. And fundamentally, people shouldn't be worried about continuing to have a job in security, you know, as long as you're good at your job, because security is not black and white. It's so many shades of gray, and we're always going to need people to make that interpretation and make that call. So I've got a little bit on a tangent there, but I think a lot of people have a tendency to oversimplify security decisions and why we do and don't do things. And it's just never that simple in real life.
Great. Thank you for sharing your views on that. Now, this question is probably to Stefan. Is, you know, security teams are usually outnumbered, right? We all agree it's about like 100 to 1, or probably in some organizations I've seen 500:1. For every 500 developers, we have one security guy. Now, how do we integrate these, you know, DevSecOps efficiently? That's the first question I have for all of you now. This question is another one. Now, if you have to pick up one thing which will drastically improve your chances of implementing DevSecOps, what it would be. So, yeah, Stefan, we'll start with you. We'll rotate with that one. Yeah.
Okay, great. So first question was, you know, how to solve the problem of having 1 to 100, like a 100:1 ratio for security. I think this goes back to using automation and tools, because if like the baseline of issues that exists, if they have to be manually looked after for each of these projects, you're gonna chase your tail the whole time, right? So by being smart about what kind of solutions are being selected to actually establish a certain baseline, or the guardrails, so to say, that can be rolled out across the organization, you give yourself time to actually say, okay, good. Now, what are the maybe more critical applications that need like some manual oversight to reduce the risk because they are more critical? I think that's an important thing to consider. On top of that, I think, yeah, being able to, you know, not just use the tools effectively to reduce the workload. I think it's also important to understand how training can be put into this, like how you can, or maybe even more so, how you can use production data to actually understand what is the risk profile for your application, and actually what are attackers going after, what kind of applications are being attacked most commonly, and which of these have the highest risk. Because if you have limited resources, prioritization is the most important thing you can do with your time, and make sure that you focus on the high impact, high value items, to make sure that you can actually focus the limited time that exists to, you know, solve a big problem that your organization has. So maybe don't look at generic OWASP top 10 or SANS top 25 issues, but look at what your organization is actually being attacked on, and focus on solving these issues. And I think another important part is to avoid playing a game of whack-a-mole, is to ensure that you can actually ideally eradicate one of these vulnerability classes across a portfolio. So try, and this maybe goes back to design thinking, what Jerome mentioned in the chat, find out that if there's one issue that's prevalent, what can you do to maybe eradicate this, not just for one application or for one release, but across an organization. And if you can follow this approach, maybe it's not that simple, but I think that's very important, because otherwise there's another cross-site scripting, there's another secret injection, and you play a game of whack-a-mole where you just try to fix it and have one team here, one team there. So if you can go a level up and figure out how you can actually solve some of these key issues that have been plaguing you, that people actually are targeting, that would go a long way of actually reducing the risk and address this, and you know, use the limited resources you have on a global level across the organization.
Thank you. That was pretty great. Thanks. Thanks for that. Jeremy, why don't you talk about, like, what do you think, if you have to pick one essential thing to improve DevSecOps implementation, what would it be?
Talking about biased, Go Cloud Native. if you look into the fundamentals of, I would say just mandates that your system has to be resilient and security will come as of today, right? Mohan was mentioning Equifax, right? We know that 90% of banks in the world still have this vulnerability up and running, right? Because legacy systems can't be patched. If you're on an environment where, I mean, the model is whether you want to do 3 letters or 4 letters, DIE or IDEA, distributed, immutable, ephemeral, and authenticated. If you implement this as part of core of your architecture, and particularly your perimeter, that enables you to have this this consistency and to remove a lot of the noise we have, right? We, in financial institution, we spend time doing privileged access reviews. Not that much great value, but we spend time doing on it. We are never sure whether we've been breached, whether you have malware. If you're able to have an environment that you destroy regularly, rebuild from scratch, that means you tell your auditors to go look at the Git repositories. That really has 2 benefits. First, you really kill the attack, the kill chain, but also you improve your legacy systems in the backend, right? And that's, Google just wrote a book on designing a secure and resilient system. And one of the aspects was exactly this: remove administrators need to connect to your systems. And if you automate and you do all those things, then you will realize that you have much less noise, much less time spent on those not additional value, and you focus on what matters. The developers will appreciate as well. And that means you take these 60% of security folks who today just fill forms, do assessments that don't really bring value, you upskill them, and you will not have a skill set or a resource issue anymore, right? So there is a lot that can be done. Very often it's a question of prioritization. And we see this modernization is very often a chief digital officer discussion towards what is needed for new services, that is needed for being agile. But there is benefits in security as well. And so there is a good look that can be done. And obviously, I wouldn't have joined Pivotal after working 15 years in FSI if I didn't believe that cloud native and application platform really bring a different game and fix a lot of the problem we've been chasing for the last 20 years.
Yeah. So basically, you just say like there's a bunch of stuff, not just one thing.
Yeah. No, just go do a platform and start modernizing your apps. It's right. Look, the model where security compensate for what IT has done doesn't work. So you need to use IT.
Great. Mohan, what's your one tip to attendees on how to fix DevSecOps issue?
Sure. I can't give one. I can give 3.
We will run out of time if we do that.
Okay, I'll do it quickly. So first thing, very important, take baby steps, but do it in a continuous manner. That's most important. You know, always start with small and then grow large. Don't, I mean, you aim high, but always start small, but make it continuous. Second aspect is give the feedbacks in an automated way, earlier the better, right? And the third aspect is ensure that the process, you give proper attention to the maturity of the process in the overall organization. So if you're able to focus on these 3 things, you definitely achieve a good security posture in very short time. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So Sarah, I think you are next. So what would be your tip to attendees on how to improve the state of DevSecOps in organization?
Okay, so my one, which is very tricky to just give one, is don't get your basics right first. Don't try and run before you can walk. Now, this isn't even DevSecOps specific, but it is so important, and people don't do it so often that they will focus on a really cool, shiny tool, but they're not even checking, they're not even doing basic scanning or patching or whatever it is. Like I said, this isn't a DevSecOps specific one, but it's so important in security that I always say, this is my one top tip: get your basic security hygiene correct, and then things get much easier. I know they're not glamorous. I know that they're usually not the nice, shiny, usually expensive thing you may have bought tool-wise, but please do the basics right, please.
Great. I think the panel has summarized it pretty well. So overall, everyone is thinking you have to get your basics right, as Sarah mentioned, but it's all about, processes, people first, people, processes, and technology. No matter how you dice it and slice it, some people might call it CAMS, which is culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. You can also put that into process, people, and process and technology, right? So I think as everyone agrees here in the panel that, hey, we have to work on our basics, get those things right, be it cloud native. It provides a lot of benefits to us, or maybe it's a processes, but definitely you have to think about the entire organization, work towards it holistically. So I think with that, we will call it a day. Thanks a lot, everyone, especially panelists who have, these guys are pretty busy, as you can see. These are some of the best people in the industry. So thanks a lot for taking your time, Jeremy, Stefan, Mohan, and Sarah. Please, thanks a lot for spending time with us. And I'm sure attendees have gotten a lot of out of this session. And if you are interested to be in touch with our panel members, here are their social media credentials. Please do follow them. And I constantly learn on a daily basis from all of these folks, be it Sarah, Stefan, Jeremy. And I do follow Mohan on LinkedIn, not on Twitter. So that's his LinkedIn profile if you are interested to follow him as well. All right. With that, I think thanks a lot, everyone, attendees, especially if you are not there, this could not have happened. Thanks a lot for spending time. And you see a lot of people have stuck around till the end. So it's been 1.5 hours. And then we see a lot of people still on the chat. Thanks a lot. And then I hope you will join us again when we do this panel again. Thanks a lot. And with that, we will say bye-bye.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care. Peace. And
Bye.
don't
Thanks,
forget.
everybody. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Stay
Yeah.
safe.
Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.